Okay, so everybody's doing all right today. Could I answer any questions before we get started? Okay, I think today I'm going to just about have to call this a do-over from last time. And there are a number of different things that I worked on up here on Tuesday that didn't quite seem to work out one way or another. Right? It turns out it was basically all stupid mistakes on my part. Right? There actually wasn't much of anything as far as the code went that I did wrong. Right? One little thing that I had done wrong, right? You might remember at one point I was trying to get the order attribute to work when I was accessing semesters through courses, right? Which linked through the sessions table, and they didn't seem to be coming out in the right order. Well, that's because I had specified the order wrong. Instead of telling it to primarily sort by the year and then secondarily sort by the season, I had typed it the other way. I had told it to sort primarily by the season and then by the year, so the years weren't quite coming out the way I was expecting. I had just reversed those two, that's all. That was a little thing, right? Another one of the things that I had worked on Tuesday that didn't quite seem to work out was this line right here. We were essentially talking about custom associations, stepping a little bit off the normal path of setting up associations between different tables in Active Record. Right? We already have an association where we have course, which is the class that I'm in right now, being associated with sections. Right? We say that a course has many sections. Right? But then what I was trying to show you is that through the use of some special attributes with the has many method, we're able to kind of customize and do some sort of little tricks with that association. So for example, instead of just saying a course has many sections, we could do something like say that a course has many online sections. Call it sort of a special subtype of section. Right? The trick to that entire thing was that has many online sections by itself would cause Active Record to look for a table called online sections, which wouldn't work. I don't want to have to keep my sections, regular sections in one table, my online sections in a different table. Instead, I want online sections to just sort of be a type of regular section. Right? So in order to get Active Record to work with this online section idea correctly, what I needed to do was add a couple extra parts to the has many method call here. One of those parts was putting in a class name argument where I'm basically telling it that, hey, even though I'm calling this association online sections, the actual table you should look at is still called section. Right? Now, I don't actually say the name of the database table, I just tell it the name of the class. Right? From the name of the class, Active Record is then able to infer the name of the table. So it takes my capitalized singular form of the class name, lowercases it and pluralizes it in order to figure out what the actual table name in the database is going to be. Right? If I had left it at just that, just put in that class name attribute, then what would have happened is whenever I asked for online sections, it would have been just like asking for regular sections. Right? So it would have worked, okay, but it would have really been pretty useless. Why call sections both sections and online sections? So what makes online sections a little bit special then is this third argument that I'm giving to has many, which is a conditions argument, where I'm telling it a section only should be returned, should only be considered an online section if its meets at attribute is nil. So my basic thinking was that if a section has a specific time it meets at, it's a regular section. Whereas if it has no specific meets at time, then we'll say that's because it's an online section. Right? So that's what I had written on Tuesday. Right? And it turns out that was exactly right. There was nothing at all wrong with what I had written there. My problem came in when I went over to the console and tried to actually demonstrate it. Okay. What I had done over in the console was I had said course.online sections. And I got an error saying undefined method online sections. Right? And that's exactly what I should have gotten. Right? If I say course.online sections, what I'm doing is asking for all the online sections of what? Right? I'm just saying course in general. Right? I'm not telling it online sections of which course specifically. It's like if I just said course.sections, I get the exact same error. Right? And we know that part was working fine from before. The trick is I was treating it like it was a class method, essentially. I thought that was something, I was thinking that that was something that I could call directly from the class, and it's not, right? If I actually do retrieve a specific course, like if I retrieve the Rails course, I'll do that by doing a course.find by ID of 1. If I then go to Rails, the course, the specific instance of a course, and I ask for the online sections, well, guess what? It works just fine. Right? All of the sections that were actually returned to me there were sections where meets at is nil. You see meets at for the 3 different sections of Rails that were returned when I asked for online courses have no value. Okay? Whereas if I go to Rails and I just generally ask for sections, all sections, right, there's an extra one there that actually does have a value for meets at. So nothing wrong with the code I wrote, but my expectation as to how that was going to work was what I messed up. I didn't demonstrate it right. But at least the code was good. Do I get points for that? Does that make sense? Basically how that's working? It's not really all that big of a necessity, right? It's more of a convenience, being able to do something like this, right? I could always, if I wanted my online sections, do something like for the Rails course, give me all the sections where meets at is nil. And that would do the same thing, right? So it's not super necessary that I set up any kind of custom association like I've done here. But if getting the online sections is something that I find myself doing very frequently, right, then this gives me a way of being able to get the online sections that's a little bit simpler to type. Right? Being able to just say Rails.online sections, right, as opposed to having to do the sections.where like I did there at the top of the screen. Right? It also certainly contributes to readability, I would say. Right? The way I did it up at the top of the screen, you can kind of look at it and figure out, okay, so we're retrieving all the sections where meets at is nil. But what's it mean if a section's meets at is nil? Right? It doesn't really explain that part. Whereas if I say Rails.online sections, there's really no doubt as to what I'm doing there. I'm retrieving the online sections. The detail that that means that meets at is nil is kind of hidden away inside the model, which is probably where it should be because that's essentially a business rule more than anything else. Okay? All right. The other place that I tried getting this same basic concept to work was with categories, where we could create a self-referential join, a self-referential relationship, essentially. What I wanted to be able to do was to have a category table, a single table that stored all my categories. But I wanted the categories to be able to relate to one another as parent and subcategories. So I could add, say, 3 different categories to my category table, but I could actually have associations built in there as well. So that, for example, 2 of those categories could be considered subcategories of the one other category. Right? And being able to do that basically all comes down to those custom associations like we just did with the online sections of a course. Right? So what I have in my category model is I've said that a category has many subcategories. And again, just like with the online sections, if I left it at that, active record would be left assuming that there was a table in my database called subcategories, which there is not. The subcategories themselves are actually just categories in the category table. So the class name argument goes in, telling it, don't look for a subcategories table. Right? The data for subcategories will be found in the categories table. Right? In this particular case, since it's more of an association we're dealing with, less of just sort of a filter like we had with the online sections, I also had to include another argument here for foreign key, right? Telling it what key to actually look at in order to be able to determine the back and forth of this relationship. And in this case, the foreign key is a field that I put into the database called parent category. Right? Same basic thing down here then with the belongs to. Right? I said that every category could belong to a parent category. Again, that would mean that by default Active Record would look for a table called parent category, which doesn't exist. So I told it parent categories are actually just categories in the category table, and again, use the foreign key parent category in order to resolve that relationship. Right? And on Tuesday, I messed that up as well. I was doing category.parent category and getting an error. I was doing category.subcategories and getting an error, which, just like with the online sections, makes perfect sense. Of course I was getting errors, right? When I say category.parent category, well, the parent category of what? I'm not telling it which category I want the parent category of. I can't ask for the parent category of all categories, right? I have to have a specific category that I want to know the parent of. Same thing with subcategories, right? What's the subcategories of categories? You know, it just doesn't make sense. I need to be calling those methods on particular instances of categories. So do I actually have any categories? No, right now I have no categories whatsoever. So let me go ahead and make some, and let's see if this actually works. Okay. I'm going to make a category called IT. And this is actually going to be the information technology category. There we go. So I now have a category called IT, information technology. Okay. Let me also make a category called web development, WD. Category create, where the name is web development. There we go. Okay. So now if I look at all my categories, there's two of them in there, information technology and web development. Neither of those two has a parent or subcategories at the moment. Okay. If I say IT.subcategories, I get back an empty array because there are no subcategories for IT right now, but no error. Right? So again, the code that I had written over here to specify the custom associations is working just fine. I just wasn't using it the right way. It's like holding a knife by the wrong end. Nothing wrong with the knife. Right? You just don't know how to use it. Right? If I go to web development and I ask for its parent category, right, I get back nil. There is no parent right now. Okay. Now if I go to IT, information technology subcategories, and I push into it web development, if I then save my categories, looks like it had already done it, but just in case. Okay. If I now go to IT and ask for its subcategories, it comes back and says web development is a subcategory. Okay. If I go to web development and I ask for its parent category, it comes back and tells me information technology. So a self-referential link. Right? Two different categories stored in the same table that have relationships with one another. Right? A one-to-many relationship in this case. Right? Let me make a couple others. Let me make a new category called DP. This is going to be desktop programming. There we go. I'm going to take desktop programming and make it a subcategory of IT. There we go. Do you notice in the parent category field, which is essentially a excuse me, a foreign key field, the notation is a little bit different. We're not getting just plain old IDs there. Right? Usually in the foreign key field we just see ID this or ID that, ID 5, ID 9. But here, whether it's a result of the fact that they're all part of the same table or just some difference in the notation, Right? It definitely does show up a little bit differently, but it is easy to look and tell, yeah, there's definitely a parent category assigned there. Okay, let me do JP category create where the name is Java programming. And then for desktop programming subcategories, I'm going to push in Java programming. So now we actually have 3 levels of relationship there. If I go to IT and ask for its subcategories, web development and desktop programming are subcategories of IT. If I go to desktop programming and I ask for its subcategories, I get Java programming. Yeah. So it's working fine. Working fine. What do you think? Do you have questions about these self-referential links? That's part of your homework assignment, and I pretty much did it exactly the way it is in the homework assignment. Right? It would just be a matter of taking these same custom associations and applying them in the homework the way it's asked for. Okay. Fixed all my mistakes from Tuesday, I hope. All right, ready to talk about something new? Moving on. Let's see, I'm going to go back over to my course model. And this part that I struggled for, the online sections relationship, I'm actually going to comment that out. What I want to do is I want to be able to specify online sections in a slightly different way. Right? Basically what the idea might be is, what if in our application we have the general idea of what a section is, right? But there are different and specific types of sections. Right? Say for example we have online sections and on-campus sections. Okay? The way that I was doing it here works fine, so long as there is no functional difference between those different types of sections. As long as I want online sections and on-campus sections to, say, be validated the same way, as long as on-campus sections and online sections have the exact same data requirements, right, then the way I was doing it here would be okay. But if there are differences between online sections and on-campus sections, then this particular way might not be the best way to go, just doing this kind of custom relationship. Right? Say, for example, that online sections should have a URL that is required. You can't put an online section into the system unless the URL for the class is specified. Right? Maybe for on-campus sections, meets at is required. We have to specify when the class meets. So we have different validation needs, different data requirement needs, depending on whether it's an online section or an on-campus section. Online requires a URL, but no meets at. On-campus requires a meets at, but no URL. Okay? How could we accomplish that? One possibility would be to just set them up as 2 separate tables, 2 separate models. One database table and model for online sections, one database table and model for on-campus sections. That would certainly be the most straightforward way to go. But if everything about those 2 is the same, other than that one little difference, that it could end up causing us a lot of duplication. If there's a lot of other custom functionality that we build around the concept of a section, right? If in all other ways sections are always treated equally, right, then that's going to make our lives actually much more complicated in the long run, right? Now, if we forget about sort of the database side of things for a minute, and we were just talking about pure Ruby objects, pure Ruby classes, right, what would be the way to create two things that are 90% similar, just varying in their little 10% without having to duplicate everything? And usually we would use inheritance, right? We would create a section class, and then we would inherit from the section class a online class and a on-campus class, right? And then everything that went into the section class would be shared between the online and the on-campus subclasses. Okay? But in the two subclasses, we'd be able to put in custom functionality that only apply to those subtypes, right? So if we were just dealing with plain old regular Ruby objects, Ruby classes, it would be pretty easy. But what about when the database part comes in? Well, actually Active Record has us covered there in that it has the ability to essentially work with inherited classes, inherited models, and take care of the database side of things for us. Right? If we wanted to be able to set something like this up, what we would essentially need to do is just go ahead and on the model side, go ahead and set up the inheritance the same way we would if there was no database involved whatsoever. Right? So I already have the section model, right? Okay. What I could do is I could go ahead and create a new model. Maybe I'll call it online, and I'll just say it inherits from the section model. I'm going to save that as on_line.rb in my model folder. Okay. And I'll also go ahead and create a class called onCampus. And I'll say that inherits from section. Okay. And I'll save that as on_campus.rb. in my models folder. Right? So I've got my section model, which is sort of my base class. Right? Oh, I misspelled online when I saved the file. I called it one line. Online. There we go. That's better. Okay. I've got online that inherits from my section class, and I've got on campus, which I also misspelled. Ah! There, on campus, which inherits from my section model. Somebody needs to take me out back and shoot me. Oh, gee whiz. This is ridiculous. All right, so anyway, right, there we go. I've got sort of the model part of it set up. Okay? Now, what do I have to do in order to let Rails actually mirror this inherited relationship on the database side of things for me? Well, it's actually pretty easy. All I need to do is I need to add a type column to the table. Right? If I go to my sections table, and I add a type column, right, what Active Record will automatically do is anytime I'm dealing with just a generic section, type will remain blank. But if I deal with an online section specifically, then Active Record in that type column will automatically put in online, knowing that it should associate that particular record specifically with an online model, not a generic section model. And again, if I specifically create an on-campus record, right, in that type column it will store the fact that it is an on-campus record, and whenever I access it, it will treat it specifically as a object of the on-campus model. Right? So I need to jump back over to my console. I'm going to get out of the console. Okay? I need to run a little migration to add that type column. So I'll do Rails G migration. I'm going to say add type and URL to sections. Right? I'm going to add the type column, but I'm also going to add a URL column, right, so that our online sections can have URLs. And then I'll just tell it my fields I want to add are type and URL. They're both strings. I'll hit enter, let it generate my migration. I'll do rake db migrate to apply the migration. There we go. It added my two extra fields, type and URL. And at that point, if I jump back into my console again, if I ask it what a section is, it's able to tell me. You can see the type and the URL fields that have been added there at the bottom. If I ask it what on campus is, you see it recognizes that as well. It says on campus inherits from section, and this is all the fields that you can have for an on-campus class. If I ask it what online is, same thing. Online inherits from section. Here's all the fields that you can have with an online section. So far it seems to be recognizing everything just fine. If I go to my section table, look at all the sections I currently have. There they all are. Right now, all of the sections that are listed have nothing for their type because those were all set up as just generic sections before we had these sub-specific section types. If I were to go in now and I was to do something like, say, OLS1 equals online section 1, okay? If I say online.create, and let me create a new section that has a CRN of 7s. There we go. If I look at all the sections that are listed in the database now, that new number 7 section that I just added specifically as an online section, you can see under its type column, active record is automatically filled in online. So whenever I come back and I use that particular section, right, everything that happens with that particular section, right, will be associated not only with whatever's going on in the section model, but also specifically whatever I put into the online model. Right. Same thing if I create on campus. If I say OCS1, on campus section 1, and I say on campus .create, and I create an on-campus section that has a CRN of 8s, when I come back and look at all my sections, that last one that I created in the type column is listed specifically as being of type on campus. Right? So under the hood, Active Record is keeping track of specifically what type of sections these are. Right? The first batch of them, 1 through 6, are all sort of generic sections created before I had specific types. But from this point on, whenever I create a new section, if I either create it specifically as an online or an on-campus section, right, Active Record will automatically keep track of which one it is. And it's doing all this without me having to have separate models, separate database tables. Right? So instead of having to have an online section table and an on-campus section table, and then deal with the frustrations of occasionally having to merge those two together when I want to talk about all sections generically, without having to duplicate efforts for things that are common to all sections. Right? Instead, I can have both of those two different types of sections stored in a single table for convenience. For convenience, when I need to, I can just treat them all generically as sections. But I can also customize them both. Like, for example, over in my section model, let's say for section we validate the presence of the CRN. So essentially, every section, no matter what type it is, has to have a CRN. We can't save it unless it has a CRN. Okay? Since I put that into the section model, that's going to apply equally to online and on-campus sections. Right? So now no section of any type can be created that doesn't have a CRN. Over in the online section class, sure.
Is that a 10 megabyte router?
Yeah, I believe so.
It's a 1000. Yeah. And then we've got all this stuff. So this is another
Slightly bad condition, huh?
One of the things that we lived through.
It's been trumped over for years now. Yeah.
Sorry to bother you. And 16 stations. And this room has a whole other electrical issue that if you look to it, it only has about 2 circuits we discovered.
Yeah, one on each wall.
One on each wall.
Uh-huh.
So when you plug the computers wrong in the wrong order, it actually shuts the whole room down. Both of those issues.
And if you
had to learn how to split the power supply.
Yeah. And there's also the power in the floor, those old brass plated outlets down there. And there's a good handful of them. Whenever you plug anything in, they arc and smoke and fire and yeah. We were told it would be $200 per outlet for them to disable them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, guys.
That might be working.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. Okay. So anyway, to my section model, I added a validation that we had to have a CRN, so that's going to apply to both online and on campus. If I go over to online, what I could do is I could do something like, say, validate the presence of the URL. Right? The neat thing about that then, right, is that that is only going to apply to online sections. So I won't be able to save an online section unless a URL is present. Over and on campus, I could do the same basic thing for the meetsat. Where I'll say that every on-campus section can't be saved unless we specify when it meets at. Okay? So anything we put into the section model, just like with any other type of inheritance, will apply to all the subclasses. So the validation for CRN will apply to online and on-campus sections. But in online and on-campus, we can put in specific validations or specific other functionality if we need to for those. If I go back over to my console, reload everything, if I try to create a new on-campus section, OCS2 I'll call it, if I say on-campus, create, let's say I give it a CRN, which is certainly going to be necessary, okay, but I don't specify meets at. Okay. If I try OCS2.save, it won't save. If I go to OCS2 errors and look at the errors for meets at, oops, oh, errors, left an S off there, it tells me can't be blank. For that on-campus section 2, if I look at the errors for URL, it has no problem. It doesn't care that I didn't give the on-campus section a URL, right? Because, of course, in our on-campus model, we don't specify that we have to have a URL. That only happens if it's an online section. Okay. So do you see the benefit of being able to create subclasses that way? It can be a handy thing. Only one actual table in the database. Right? So when we need to, everything can be treated the same. I can always at any time come back and just say, give me a list of all the sections. I don't care if they're on campus, if they're online, just give them all to me. Okay? And that works fine. Okay? But for places where they do differ a bit, we have those two sub-models that we can create that let us treat them each sort of uniquely, individually. Maybe is a better word.
What was the command line again to add type and URL?
It's just creating a migration. There it is. Rails G migration, add type and URL to sections. Type URL. Okay. The magic that basically made that whole thing work, right, was two parts. It was essentially creating new classes that inherit from an existing model, like on campus and online inheriting from section. Okay. That by itself, though, is not enough. You've got to add that type column. Right? You have to have that type column in the table so Active Record has somewhere to store its little notation about which one of those submodels was used to create something so it knows how to treat it. Right? How to treat it beyond just generically as a regular old section. Fun stuff. Okay, what else can I tell you about that? Anything else you want to try? Okay. Next thing to talk about then are scopes. Scopes are basically a modification that we can make to models that act in a way sort of like custom finds. Right? In our console, we can write find statements all day long. Like, for example, if I wanted to find, say, all the courses that are Ruby related, let's say, right? I could do course, right? Where, maybe we could say something where title. Didn't courses have titles? Where title is like something or title is like something else. And for those two somethings and something else's, I'll say where the title is like Ruby or the title is like Rails. And that goes out and finds two courses for me, the Rails course, the Ruby course. If there was a Rails 1, a Rails 2, an advanced Ruby, a beginning Ruby, an intermediate Ruby, it would have found everything that had Rails or Ruby in the title. Right? So I can write a nice little where like that anytime I wanted to find, let's say, Ruby-related courses. Okay? If I find that that is something that I'm doing frequently, though, right, that is basically what a scope can be used for. Right? So a scope is a little modification I can make to a model, right, that acts as sort of a custom find method. Let me come back over here to my course model, for example. If I wanted to do that exact same query, but as a scope, right, scopes are always created by using the keyword scope. Okay. I can then give my scope a name, so I could say this scope is called Ruby related. And then I can essentially specify how it is that I want it to find whatever it's supposed to find. Where the title is like something or the title is like something else. And again, make it like Ruby or like Rails. If I reload my console now, if I go to the course now and I ask for Ruby related, the scope executes and it basically does the find for me. So instead of me having to write that where clause every time, I can instead have a scope created that basically will do that for me whenever I ask for that particular scope. You can kind of think of it as saying, give me back in this case courses that are within this scope, within the scope of being Ruby related. Here's how to determine if they're related to Ruby or not, is kind of the way this is meant to work. Okay. We can of course do that by hand like I did a minute ago. It's also very common to do something like that with just class methods. I could have just created a class method in the course model called Ruby related, and I could have had it do the same where clause on self, on the course itself, or on the courses, the course class, and return the same basic things. But by doing it with scope, there are a few advantages to it. Okay? Kind of hard to see what they might be at the moment, but here let's add a little bit more. We'll add another scope and I'll show you some of the neat things that you can do with scopes that are a little bit trickier if you were to write them as class methods. Okay? Let's add courses. Well, let's set up our courses so that courses can fall into categories. We created that category class, category model a little bit ago. Let's set it up so that we can categorize courses. Okay? If I want to be able to categorize courses, I'm going to need a one-to-many relationship between categories and courses, where a course can belong to a category, but a category can have many courses in it. So I would need to put a category ID field into my courses table. So let me do a migration. Let's do Rails G migration, add category ID to courses, and I'll say add a field called category ID that holds an integer. There's my new migration. Rake DB migrate. Migrate my database. Apply that migration. Now every course should have a category ID field. Okay. Over in my course model then, I'm going to say that every course belongs to a category. And in my category model, I'm going to say every category has many courses. Is that good? If I jump back into my console at that point, let me grab my web development category. I'll say WD equals category let's do find by name, web development. So there I've grabbed my web development category, put it into a variable called WD. Let me grab my Rails course. I'll just do course.find1. I remember that it was the first one. Now if I go to my Rails course and I ask what its category is, I get back nil because it's not currently assigned to a category. But if I say assign Rails' category to be equal to WD, web development, save Rails so that that new data in it gets updated. Now if I go to the Rails course and I ask about its category, I get back web development. Okay. If I go to the web development category and I ask about its courses, Tells me Rails is a web development course. Very good. What other courses do I have? I've got an HTML course in there. That's web development, or could be. Let me get the HTML course. Course.find course 4. If I say HTML.category is web development, save HTML. Now if I go to web development and I ask what courses it has, I only got back Rails. Let's try wd.reload. And let me ask it about its courses again. There we go. It had gotten a little stale. HTML showing up in there now. Okay. If I go to HTML and I ask about its category, it tells me web development. If I say in web development, looking at its courses, if we go to the first course, what's its title? Rails. Knew that was going to happen, right? Okay. Back to the scopes. So I added a scope to course that lets me ask for courses that are specifically Ruby related. Let's say over here in my course model, I also want to add a scope that lets me ask for classes that are specifically web related. To figure out if a course is web related or not, what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to look at its category. Basically, if it's in the web development category, then it's web related. Maybe they're also in the future, maybe we would add like a web design category, and those would be considered web related as well. So basically what I want to do is with the web related scope, I want to be able to say if the name of the category that it belongs to has web in it, then it's web related. So essentially I want to say where the title of the category, categories.title, is like web. The trick is that actually won't work, because when we run this scope, all we actually have access to is the course itself, which includes a category ID number but doesn't include the category's title. So what I would actually need to do in order to make this work is I would need to do a join method in here, where I would say first join the information from the category model, which would then provide us with the actual title of the categories, so I could then go and do that where query that I'm wanting to do. Oh, it's not join, it's joins. Okay, back over in the console, if I reload, okay, if I go to my course model and I ask for everything that's Ruby related, I get back Rails and Ruby. If I go to my course model and I ask for everything that's web related, bummer. It's not like in my join. Oh, wait. Well, does it care if this is a string or not? If I put that in as a symbol. This is one of those places where pluralization gets really confusing. Singular here, plural here, I think. Oh, wait, categories don't have a title. Categories have a name. Let's try that again. Reload. All right. Course.web-related. There we go. Now it works. So when I ask for web-related courses, I get back Rails and HTML because they're both part of the web development category. If I do Ruby-related, I get back Rails and Ruby because they have Rails and Ruby in their title. Rails or Ruby in their title. Okay, so what was the point in all this? Obviously, scopes give us a nice way to be able to extract particular sub-groupings of information from our models. But another one of the neat things about scopes is that they are chainable. You can call one scope off of another scope off of another scope, on and on and on. For example, I could say, for my courses, show me everything that's Ruby related and web related. It actually filters through both of those two scopes, and only thing I then get back is Rails, because that's the only course I have right now that is considered both Ruby related and web related. Now again, we could set something like that up with just class methods, where we could chain the method calls together like that and have it work, but it gets a bit more complicated. Whereas scopes are basically meant to be able to do that sort of thing. It kind of happens automatically, happens sort of for free. So scopes can be a pretty neat little thing, pretty nice little convenience. They contribute a lot to readability, and they have some nice functionality that goes along with them, especially when it comes to being able to do these sort of multi-filtered calls. You can do quite a bit with them, right? They're pretty flexible, pretty customizable. How are we on time? We got a bit of time. We got enough time to jump in this, I think. Okay. Oh, rats. Let me get back in the console real quick. We have a semester model, right? Yeah, our semesters are pretty simple right now. They've got a season and a year, and that's really the only data we're saving about them. What I was thinking was, could we, in our semester model, create scopes that would tell us whether a semester was in the future, in the past, or was a current semester? Well, if we were even going to give that a try, then we would have to know when every semester starts and ends. So we're going to have to add extra data to our semester model, to our semester table. So let me jump back out of the console again. Let's do another migration. I feel like I'm doing a lot of migrations today. I'll say add start and end dates to semesters. So I want to add a field called starts, and I'm going to make its data type datetime, so we can store an actual datetime object in it. I'll make another field called ends with the data type of datetime. My new migration's created. Rake db migrate to apply it. Not ache, that would be rake. There we go. Jump back into my console again. Semesters now have season, year, and starts and ends date time. All right. I don't care so much about the time part of that. Mostly it's just the day that I'm concerned with. So let's see if we can get some data filled in here, so we have something to work with. We have fall 2013. That's right now, right? This is fall 2013. So that is semester 2. Okay. So let me say fall equals semester find 2. Oh, I just thought of something. If I say fall dot starts, if I tried doing update attributes and tried setting the starts date that way, that would fail because I didn't add starts and ends to the adder accessible for the class. Let me see if it'll let me assign it just using the equal sign. I think it will. Okay. To get the start date for the current semester, I'm going to do datetime.parse, and then I think I can just give it a date. This semester started 2013-01. I don't remember what day we actually started. Let's say it was the 15th, January 15th. If I do fall save, it puts that in. If I do fall.ends equals datetime parse 2013-05-22. I think I'm getting the months right, but I'm almost certainly wrong on the days. So don't everybody stop showing up on the 22nd just because I flubbed this in an example.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like the second week, first second week of May.
Is it earlier than that?
So
Yeah.
keep coming.
Yeah, we're going to keep going till the 22nd. Right? Okay, fall.save. There we go. If I take a look at fall, I've got starts and end dates in there now. Let's do the same thing for a few other semesters. I want to have at least one current, one past, and one future so we can see about writing some scopes for accessing them. Summer 2012. Let's do semester find 6. Okay. I'll do summer.starts, datetime parse, 2012. Summer usually starts in June sometime. So let's say 06-14. Oh, was that supposed to be starts with an S? Yeah, there we go. Let me do summer.ends, datetime, parse, 2012, 07-19. Summer save. So summer now has starts and end dates, so that's a past semester for us. So we've got the current semester, we've got a past. Future semester, let me grab spring 2013. Wait, fall spring, this is spring 2013, I was wrong. Fall 2013 was last semester. Let's grab fall 2014. Ah well, it'll work. Let's call this one next fall. We'll say semester find 4. Next fall starts. Datetime parse. Fall 2014 would actually start in 2013. This is not important. It would be August. We'll say the 23rd. next fall ends, date time parse, it would end 2013 December something. We'll say December 10th. And next fall, save. There we go. So in all my semesters, I have one that'll count as the current semester, one that'll count as the future, one that'll count as the past. So we can try out some scopes. See if we can get it to work. Okay. All right, so back over in my semester model. Let's make a scope called current. To be the current semester, we'd have to say where starts, let me turn that into a string, where starts is less than or equal to some value, and where ends is greater than or equal to some value, and that some value is now. If it started before now and it ends after now, then it must be current. So I'll do datetime.now and datetime.now. Make sense? Okay. In my console, I'll reload, and if I say semester.current, that was the one I set up as being current. Good. If I do scope.past, and to get my past semesters, to be past, it basically needs to be where it's ended before now. So we'll say if ends is less than date time now, then that's the past. Let's go ahead and throw future in here too. For future, then starts would have to be greater than now. Something like that. So the idea being, instead of us having to do all this complicated stuff to figure out if the semester is future, past, or current, we'd have these all set up as these nice little scopes. Reload my console. Semester.current is that. Semester.past is last summer. Semester.future, fall 2014. Looks like it's doing okay. Didn't some of those semesters actually have like sections in them? Looks like we have sections assigned to semesters 2, 3, 5, and 6. Looks like semester 3 is the most used one. Which semester is semester 3? That's not one that I set up. 6 is. If I say semester dot future dot sections, Oh, there could be lots of future sections, so I'd have to specify. What about the first, what are the sections of the first future section? Or first future semester? It says there aren't any. I was hoping there would be. Ah, well. Chaining other methods on after our custom scopes. Yeah, so anyway, scopes. What do you think? Questions about those? All right, very good. Hey, guess what? I think I basically have one more little active record topic to cover, and then we'll be ready to go on and start talking about views. So I think we can finish up active record here today, and we can start on views next week. Be glad to get out of the console, won't you? I know, it drags on. I think later you'll be glad we did this, though. I think. I'm probably wrong. Often am. Okay? All right, last thing I wanted to tell you about was dirty objects. Sounds like a neat subject, doesn't it? Ooh, dirty objects. Right? Maybe a little bit. Not exactly. I just wanted to give you a little peek at kind of what active record does under the hood. You've noticed that it does things like whenever we create a new instance of a model and we try to save it, it of course runs validations, right? But it actually does a whole lot of other interesting stuff sort of under the hood that's kind of cool. Let me retrieve a section. Which section? I don't guess it really matters all that much. Let me just grab section 1. I'll just call it S. Section.first. So I have a section here in the variable S. Right? A few methods here that we haven't seen. Every active record model object has a method called changed, which just lets us know if any changes have taken place to that model. Right? In this case, I just pulled that object out of the database. Right? So when I ask if it's changed, the answer, of course, is false. Nothing has happened with it. If I did actually make a change to it, let's say I assigned a URL to it, if I then went back and asked if it's changed, active record knows that, hey, something has happened here. A new value has been assigned. So when I ask if it's changed, it comes back and tells me true. Right? I imagine that was probably something built in sort of for optimization reasons. If we extracted an object, some data from the database, didn't actually change it, but then asked it to save it again, well, it would be a simple matter for the object to look and say, well, nothing's changed. There's no real reason to hit the database. Let's not bother. Right? Every once in a while, that kind of thing, being able to access it could come in handy for us too. Right? An object that has changed but hasn't yet been saved again, basically like my S object there, is called a dirty object. It's an object that at this point is actually out of sync with the data that's stored in the database. Okay. Not only does active record keep track of whether an object is dirty or not, whether it is changed or not, but it can actually do a lot of stuff telling you what has changed. If I say s.changed without the question mark, it comes back and gives me a list of all of the attributes of the object that have had changes applied to them since the last time the object was saved. So when I ask what's changed, it tells me the URL is what has changed. If I change the CRN for the object, and I again ask what's changed, now it tells me the URL and the CRN have changed. It's pretty neat. Not only does it keep track of the fact that things have changed, not only does it keep track of exactly what has changed, but it also keeps track of what the value was and what the new value is, with a little bit of sort of method missing magic. I think I developed a lisp there for a second. Method missing magic. Method missing magic. Right? If I go to S, if I say CRN underscore was, it tells me what the old value of the CRN was. If I say S CRN change, okay, it tells me what it is that I'm asking to change it to. Well, actually, in that case, it gives me both. Okay. Same thing with the URL. If I do s.url was, it was nil. Tell me all about the change for the URL. Was nil, we're changing it to this. Right? And of course, if I take that object and I actually do save it, commit the changes to the database. Right? If I now say s.changed, question mark, the answer is false. The copy we now have is identical to what's actually in the database. It's a clean object. It's no longer dirty. Right? If I ask it what's changed, well, nothing. It's not a dirty object. Okay. That's basically it. What do you think of Active Record? It's a pretty neat little package. Spent a lot of time talking about it. I know you think about Rails, woohoo, let's build the web pages, let's build the website and stuff. The trick is pretty much everything we're going to do from this point on is going to assume that we understand all this basic Active Record stuff. So I'm sorry it takes so long to get through it, right? But we did it. We're through it. Right? So next class, next week, we'll start by talking about views, right? Which is going to pretty quickly start also pulling in controllers. So at that point, we'll have the entire MVC stack. We've got a good foundation here with all the model stuff, all of our data backend stuff. We'll put in views by themselves as much as we can, but controllers will come along very, very quickly after that. And we'll have all the pieces put together that we can start working in the browser again. Right? Writing HTML and CSS and all those wonderful and not so wonderful sort of things. Okay? Are there any last questions I can answer for you today?
Does Active Record compare to other
Favorably? I like it a whole lot better than anything else I've ever used. Before Active Record, my main experience was with, what was it called? Hibernate in Java, which I thought was just an awful nightmare. I disliked it very, very much. When I found Active Record, you know, I don't think I've ever used Hibernate again since I started playing with Active Record. It was a pain to work with before. Once I saw how nice it could be, I just could never bring myself to ever deal with it again. Other people are going to have, that is my opinion, of course. You know, technically Hibernate works. It does what it's supposed to do. It's definitely out there and widely used. And there are probably people who could extol its virtues over Active Record, but I'm not one of them. I'd take an Active Record any day. Yeah, it's pretty slick. One of the big things about it, I think, is that ever since Rails came out, ever since Active Record came out, you start seeing things that look a whole lot like it popping up everywhere. You know, there wasn't anything quite like Active Record before Active Record, not that I'm aware of anyway. But since then, I have students come to classes and I tell them about Active Record and they go, oh yeah, .NET does that now. Oh yeah, this other thing does that now. It's like, well, yeah, once somebody kind of showed the way, everybody started heading that same direction. So I think that speaks volumes about it. Anything else? Hope you all have a good weekend then. I'll see you next Tuesday.